Good afternoon, everyone. The council president is representing us in Annapolis. She's testifying, and the council vice president is part of a Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments delegation to Cuba. And so I'm third in line. I'm the past president, and I will be presiding over this afternoon's session today. So we're going to rise now for a moment of silence, those who are able. Thank you. Madam Clerk, are there any agenda or calendar changes?
Good afternoon. No, there are no changes to announce. We did receive a number of petitions this week, one supporting Equity One's vision for an improved Westwood Shopping Center. We had a petition opposing a zoning change for the Little Falls Library, one opposing the relocation of the Confederate statue in Rockville to the Beale Dawson property, one supporting infrastructure improvements to Shady Grove Metro Station, and one in support of the early learning centers at Montgomery College. Thank you.
Okay, great. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of December 3rd and February 1, 2, and 4?
Let's approve the minutes, Mr. President.
And I'll second.
Mr. Rice has moved and Mr. Katz has seconded approval of the minutes for those dates. Those in favor of approving the minutes will signify by raising their hands. And that is unanimous among those present. I need a motion to take up the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Rice has moved and Mr. Katz has seconded the consent calendar. Let me make sure that the lights are working here. Is there any commentary on the consent calendar? Mr. Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. Acting President. I have full confidence in how today's going to go. I just wanted to call my colleagues' attention to item 7, the resolution on oil and gas development. I should thank the co-sponsors of this resolution. Can I just give you a little background for a minute? This was only recently came to my attention, but in 2015, the Obama administration proposed opening parts of the U.S. coastline to oil and gas drilling. The proposals will be finalized later this year after public comment. They're part of a congressionally mandated 5-year plan that sets the boundaries for oil and gas development through 2022. The federal proposal was released in January 2015. It's the first step in allowing oil and gas drilling on the Atlantic coast. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, prepares the environmental documents on various actions based on the public comment and their analysis. I'm proposing this resolution for a few reasons. One is we all know hundreds of thousands of our constituents visit and enjoy the Atlantic coast beaches, whether they're in New Jersey or Delaware or Maryland or Virginia each year, and thousands of our residents own houses and some own small businesses on the eastern shore. Pristine beaches and a healthy marine environment are the backbone of Maryland's coastal tourist economy, and they generate tens of millions of dollars in revenue for the state. The Chesapeake Bay is obviously a national treasure that we have the privilege of protecting more than any other state, and it generates hundreds of millions in state and local taxes and supports tens of thousands of jobs. Negative impacts to our bay and our coastline, our beaches and shores could be catastrophic for our state, both in terms of the environment and in terms of the economy. The Deepwater Horizon disaster we all remember from 6 years ago devastated the Gulf of Mexico region and cost over $100 billion in lost economic activity and restoration expenses to 3,000 miles of wetlands and beaches. Only 5% of the 4.2 million barrels that was spilled then was removed during the cleanup. The rest just dissipated and had a tremendous impact on the ocean ecology. In a disaster of that scale in our area would stretch from Richmond to Atlantic City, and if this kind of drilling is allowed, there's really no going back. California allowed this drilling in 1969, as there was a public initiative since then banning new drilling, but there is no ability for California taxpayers, despite their buyer's remorse, to end the drilling that has been approved off California since 1969. The other reason I believe this is unwise and we should make our views known is because we believe in renewable energy. We have not brought this council the county down a path to continue fossil fuel use. We're very concerned about global warming. and climate change, and with oil prices at record lows, the U.S. is already the world's top oil producer. There's really no justification why this proposal should go forward, since it doesn't really add to our national security needs for oil. So the good news is there's many communities that have come together to support pass resolutions like this and to oppose the plan. There's over 100 local jurisdictions that have expressed themselves. Locally nearby, the city of Baltimore and the city of Ocean City have passed resolutions such as these. And I was recently invited to a meeting of many local officials and grassroots activists at the White House and at the Department of the Interior, where 8 states were represented, mostly actually Republican local officials and chambers of commerce and restaurant associations that made their views known that this is an unwise proposal. So I'm proposing that we join their ranks, and I urge support from my colleagues. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your work on this, Mr. Hucker. Mr. Rice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Acting President. And I first want to express my thanks to Councilmember Hucker for his leadership in this. I actually just came back from a climate change conference in Denver, Colorado. And so I was very happy to tweet out to the folks that were at that Montgomery County continues to lead the way in many innovative ways in which we continue to promote clean energy, but also protect our environment. And so I'm very happy to join Councilmember Hucker on this initiative. I also wanted to bring to your attention item D, which is our Office of Legislative Oversight report on MCPS local pension plan and supplement. We're going to be taking this up at a later date, but I really want to thank the great work of Mr. Trumka, Ms. Bryant, and Ms. McGuire, because this is truly game-changing in terms of a new and innovative way to look at some of our pension modeling that we haven't really done before, and understanding that in tough, difficult fiscal times, it really is important for us to dot every I and cross every T, and we're doing that here. We're really understanding the mechanics of how some of our pension plans work and how we can be more efficient at continuing to provide great benefits, but at the same time making sure that we're being fiscally responsible. And so I just want to thank them for their terrific work. I look forward to working with stakeholders at MCPS and with my members of the Education Committee to really come up with some great recommendations about how we can move forward together to continue fiscal sustainability for MCPS's budget and our budget as a whole. So thank you very much.
Okay, if there are no further comments, then the consent calendar is before us for approval. Those in favor of adopting the consent calendar will signify by raising their hands. And that is unanimous among those present. We are now moving into district council session. We have a hearing examiner's report and recommendation on local map amendment H110 relating to art space projects, property located at 801 Sligo Avenue. Mr. Zients, do you want to present first, or shall we have the hearing examiner present first?
Ms. Robertson is perfectly capable of taking the council through this. There was no request for oral argument. There are no procedural problems with this.
Ms. Robertson.
Morning, afternoon. This is a unique application. It's a request to rezone property from the R60 to the commercial residential neighborhood floating zone. And the property itself is in a transitional area. It's on Sligo Avenue, just outside the eastern boundary of the Silver Springs CBD. So to the east, north, and south, there are residential detached and attached units, and then you have the central business district on the western edge that is for much more intense uses. It's also the former site of the District 3 police station. And it's unique because it arises from a grassroots project. The Neighborhood Citizens Association worked with the county executive to develop a vision for reuse of the site. DHCA issued a RFQ ADP, and Art Space was selected to develop the site. They're nationally known for specializing in artist live-work units. The project itself is 68 multifamily units for incomes ranging between 30 and 60% of the AMI. There will also be 11 townhouses, 7 will be market rate, 4 will be workforce housing. There'll be and the police station itself is going to be reused for artist studios. So they will have artists living and working in the development. The master plan called for a floating zone. The problem was the floating zone it recommended is no longer available. It was under the old zoning ordinance, but it does meet the specific master plan goals because the master plan recommended the floating zone to increase the range of affordable housing in the area. It's also compatible with the neighborhood because it steps up in height and density from the east to the west, creating a transition, and it meets all the technical requirements of the zoning ordinance. And so for that reason, I recommended approval.
Any questions or comments from council members on this local map amendment? Mr. Elridge.
I just want to say that the neighborhood worked very, very hard with the executive to come up with a plan that resulted in a reuse that both dealt with some additional housing uses, but also I think brings an interesting use to South Silver Spring. And so I think it's really good for South Silver Spring, and it's a win-win, and the developers worked with the neighbors and came up with something that worked for both of them. So I think this is an example of a project where everybody working together produced something that everybody's going to get something out of.
Yeah, I agree. ArtSpace has a very successful project on Rhode Island Avenue near the Brookland Metro, and they're in several communities around the United States, and they've been very much welcomed and have enhanced, the communities in which they're located. So I think we have every reason to be very encouraged and optimistic about the success of this for overall South Silver Spring. If there are no further questions or comments, is this a roll call vote? Oh, so can I get a motion to approve the hearing examiner's recommendation? Second. Mr. Elrich has moved and Mr. Rice has seconded approval of the hearing examiner's recommendation, and it is a roll call vote.
Mr. Elrich?
Yes.
Mr. Elrich votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Reamer? Yes. Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Mr. Leventhal?
Mr. Leventhal votes yes. The hearing examiner's recommendation is agreed to by a vote of 6-0. And so we are now going to have presentations. We have a presentation by Councilmember Reamer recognizing the month of February. Sure.
I'm inviting my colleagues, Mr. Leventhal, Mr. Elrich. We did a tour recently and some work with the media program here to highlight some of the work that our brewers are doing. And it was a great experience for us, and we enjoyed it very much. So today we have with us a number of entrepreneurs who are really changing the face of Montgomery County and the community life and impacting the economy, creating jobs, and doing great things for this community. So we have Brett and Jessica with Waradaka, and I just met it's Brian, right? Brendan, with a brewery that is in the business plan stage, and we hope will be in the brewing stage before too long, called True Respite. And Julie Verratti, who is our guru and the co-founder of Denizens Brewing Company. And I haven't met you, but I've tried your excellent products at Seven Locks. So your name is? Matt. And Seven Locks, it's interesting how different each of these breweries is. Seven Locks operates out of light industrial space and has a great social environment for people in a part of Rockville that otherwise isn't a place you'd go to hang out. They're creating jobs. They're, building the economy. Julie is remaking downtown Silver Spring. Suddenly people are coming to downtown Silver Spring out of DC, as a destination. And of course the people who are there appreciate it greatly. Waradaka is operating in Laytonsville and is bringing a life to a part of the agricultural reserve community that is truly needed and appreciated and just a lot of fun. So, and True Respite may be in Bethesda. We'll see where you open up, but wherever it is will be a real benefit. So, a few years ago, Julie Verratti approached the county government and the chambers of commerce and said, I want to open a brewery, but the business model that I want to pursue is not legal. We need to do something about this. And Julie's experience with the Small Business Association, U.S. Small Business Association, made her savvy to the fact that laws can change. And so we worked together through the Nighttime Economy Task Force with the DLC, our County Department of Liquor Control. Christian has joined us. He's the head brewer at Gordon Biersch, Christian Lakey. And Brookville's here. Great, awesome. Come on in, come on in. Hey, and we got some growlers. Awesome. So well, first of all, Gordon Biersch is sort of like the OG brewer on the scene here, and right here in downtown Rockville. And then Brookville Brewery will also be in the agricultural reserve area. I've seen the equipment. I saw the equipment stacked outside. That's some pretty impressive manufacturing equipment that you have there. Come on, join us up here, gentlemen. All right, your names are? Phil Muth and Tim McDonald. Phil Muth and Tim McDonald. Awesome. Welcome. So Julie Verratti said the business model for being a brewery is not legal. We need to fix that. And so working together, many players, whether entrepreneurs, county officials, we went to Annapolis, got a change in the law, and as a result of that, Denizens was able to open and has demonstrated the viability of the business model here with support from the state of Maryland, significant loan guarantees as a manufacturing concern, support from the Montgomery County government with financial incentives as well. And it's just the beginning. We spend, through the Department of Liquor Control, over $270 million last year on beer, wine, and spirits in this county. That's what our residents spend. Of course, they may spend more outside the county as well. If we could have a significant share of that being spent creating local jobs through local production, that would have a significant boost to our community. So let's keep our dollars at home. That's what local brewing is partly all about. Of course, let's have great places to live and fun things to do, but let's keep our dollars at home and boost our economy right here. That's what Drinking Local is all about. So this is the nascent brewing scene in Montgomery County, Maryland, and it's the start of something that is just truly awesome. And yes, if you could, thank you, Mr. Elrich. And I'd like to invite my colleagues if they want to make a comment, and I'll give Julie the mic to represent the brewing industry.
Julie, why don't you? Sure.
They're not specific.
First, I just want to thank the county council, as well as the state of Maryland and, the whole delegation in Annapolis. This county has actually made a lot of strides in the past few years to really increase the type of business models that are in this county, especially in the manufacturing sector when it comes to brewing. Hans was correct that, if those changes hadn't happened to the law a couple years ago, none of these people would be up here right now. And I say this time and again, believe it or not, Montgomery County is actually hands down the most brewery-friendly jurisdiction in the entire DC metro area. We're the best county in the state of Maryland to operate a brewery. We've got better regulatory environment than DC, definitely a better regulatory environment, even our friends in Virginia, which is, I think, pretty impressive. And I think it shows a lot about what folks in this local government are doing to try to really increase business competition around here. When you buy local beer from your local brewery, you are directly supporting not only the local economy, you're supporting the environment, and you're helping increase jobs. Most right now, so Denizens Brewing Company opened about a year and a half ago. At this point, we have 40 full-time equivalent employees. We pay double minimum wage. We offer health care to our full-time employees, whether they're hourly or salary. Those folks, of those 40 people, a majority of them live right here in Montgomery County. And they get higher paychecks, they turn around and they reinvest it right back into the local economy. There's a multiplier effect that's created when you buy local. And in terms of helping the environment, you've got these products that are made right here, you're not shipping, you're going green by buying local. And it's just so much better for the community, and also your products are just going to be fresher. I mean, if you drink beer, not only at our place, but any of these other places up here, I can guarantee you it's probably kegged within the last couple of days of when you're drinking it. So it's the number one thing I can say is make sure you buy local, support all of your local breweries, and thank you for having us here.
Good. Well, we have a proclamation that I will just read very, very briefly. I know that a lot has been said already. Sorry. Thank you, Julie. Montgomery County is recognized by many to be a burgeoning and vibrant home to craft brewing, and with at least 7 local brewers and more to come. And whereas Montgomery County brewers are crafting some of the most unique and sought-after beer in the region. And whereas the local brewing industry provides good-paying manufacturing jobs to support our community and service jobs that grow the local economy. And whereas residents and visiting beer aficionados flock to Montgomery County's excellent retail outlets, restaurants, and tap rooms to enjoy locally produced beer, strengthening community life in areas as disparate as downtown Silver Spring and Rockville and the farmland of Laytonsville. And whereas in Brookville. And whereas recent changes in Maryland law sought by brewery entrepreneurs and county officials have made it easier for current and prospective brewers to market and sell their products both locally and outside of Montgomery County. And whereas these changes have helped local brewers, like those joining us today, open new breweries and restaurants, increase capacity to keep up with growing demand, and importantly, spur innovation and excellence in local brewing. And whereas to promote this important industry, Governor Larry Hogan proclaimed February to be Maryland Craft Beer Lovers Month, or as many would like to think, Feb-Brewery. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, raises a glass to Maryland Craft Beer Lovers Month, signed by Nancy Florian, Council President, on this day. Thank you. Very good. Okay, well, thank you very much, and let's take a photo, absolutely. And if you want to maybe, if you want to hold up some of your...
Pass it out.
Okay, we do need to clear this area now. Thank you all very much. We have another presentation as soon as we clear the area, recognizing Black History Month by Councilmember Rice.
All right. Well, so let's bring up all the folks that are here, including Vernon and Janet Ricks. Let's see, we've got Odessa Shannon and Ruby Rubens, Julian Norman, James Stowe, who's our Director of Office of Human Rights, who will be presenting this proclamation to, the Honorable Cherie Branson, everyone that's here for Black History, come on up, Walter. Come on. Come on up. So I had originally prepared some remarks for this morning, but the recent media storm around a 106-year-old woman who had a chance to go to the White House made me change what I was going to say. And one of the things that I want to make sure that folks understand is when she was quoted as saying, "I can die happy." That means so much. Those 4 words actually mean so much in terms of the struggle that African Americans have continued to endure over the years. And it's representative of how we continue to have more work that needs to be done. You know, Ms. McLaurin highlighted the joy as you saw her dancing. And folks, you know, some folks didn't understand why she was dancing, right? To be able to meet a president is one thing, and certainly that's something that should be celebrated. But the reality is that she never thought that she would see a day like this. She never thought that the struggles, the sacrifices, all of the things that her and many of the people that you see here standing with me had to put forth would actually result in having America's first Black president. And that says something. But it also shows our progress. It also shows that we've been able to accomplish a lot. But the reality is that we continue to celebrate these firsts now, when we've been in this struggle for over 100 years. And so it's something where I always want to make sure that we appreciate the progress that we've made, but also talk about how long it's taken for us to get there and how much still needs to be done. As I celebrate the fact that a young man who grew up and was born and raised here in Montgomery County could be the president of the council a couple years ago is a big deal for me. But the reality is that those things should be the norm, not the celebration. And until we get to that point, that's why we still have more work that needs to be done. So that being said, I want to read this proclamation, and I know that we're going to have Director Stowe, who's going to speak on behalf, and then, you know, I'm going to violate the rule because I am going to allow another person to speak as well. So I apologize, Acting Council President Leventhal. But let me go ahead and read this proclamation. I'll read it fast. Whereas February is National Black History Month, which recognizes and remembers the people and events in the history of the African diaspora, and whereas on January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, setting the U.S. on a path to end slavery. 1 century later, in 1963, more than 200,000 Americans gathered for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, calling for African American civil and economic rights. And whereas Black History Month had its beginnings in the United States in 1926, when Black educator and historian Carter G. Woodson moved to officially recognize the achievements and contributions that Blacks made to our society, and whereas Montgomery County continues to evolve in diversity, having become a majority-minority county for the first time, according to the U.S. Census from 2010, including more than 16% of the population being identified as Black, which is a 25% increase from the previous decade. And whereas this year's Black History Month theme is Hallowed Ground, Sites of African American Memories, which urges communities across the nation to preserve sites that trace the African American history, beginning before the arrival of the Mayflower through the present. And whereas within the past year, Montgomery County has worked toward this goal by refurbishing the Visitor Center at the Woodlawn Manor Cultural Center, a site that played a key role in the Underground Railroad. And whereas Montgomery County is celebrating Black History Month with numerous educational opportunities at parks, museums, libraries, art venues, and historic sites throughout the month, now therefore be it resolved that the County Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, hereby proclaims February 2016 Black History Month in Montgomery County, and be it further resolved that all residents are encouraged to recognize the outstanding achievements of African Americans who have greatly enriched our community. Presented this 23rd day of February in the year 2016, and it's signed by our County Council President, Nancy Florine. Mr. Stowe.
Councilman Rice and members of council, and to my esteemed colleagues here, we thank you for this opportunity to recognize this very special month, Black History Month. While it is in fact a sharing of African Americans who make up our county and our nation, it is also a chance to look at American history, because that we celebrate in the month of February is a celebration for all. I would be remiss if I did not share with you that hallowed ground, as was stated by our council member, is the theme for this year's Black History Month celebrations all across the country. We'll be re-embarking on a trip down south through all the various civil rights locations as part of this celebration as well. We invite you to go to our website, the county's website, and find out about the Maryland Civil Rights Educational Freedom Tour, where we'll have a chance then to touch and talk to and be a part of history in a real sense, in a very visible sense, in a very tangible sense. And so we invite all of you then to go to our website and find out about the Maryland Educational Civil Rights Freedom Tour. I would end my comments this morning by simply adding this thought from a poem that I think is so indicative of what we talk about. And the words of, again, Councilman Rice really set this up. And the poem's entitled Frederick Douglass. When it is finally ours, this freedom, this liberty, this beautiful and terrible thing, needful to man as air, usable as earth, when it belongs to us all, when it is truly instinct, brain matter, diastole, systole, reflex action, when it is finally won, when it is more than the gaudy mumbo-jumbo of politicians, this man, this Douglass, this former slave, this Negro beaten to his knees, exiled, visioning the world where none is lonely, none hunted, alien. This man, superb in love and logic, this man shall be remembered. Oh, not with statues' rhetoric, not with legends and poems and wreaths of bronze alone, but with the lives grown out of his life, the lives fleshing his dream of the wonderful, needful thing.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Ruby Rubens, and I just wanted to say a couple of things. Thank you, Councilmember Rice, for this proclamation and recognition of this special month. I sometimes feel as though I'm in a reverse time capsule, especially some of the things that I've seen happen recently. I was particularly disturbed by a video that went viral in Virginia a week or so ago. The video attempted to describe structural and institutional racism to our young people, to our students. And adults took exception to that and felt that it created white guilt. We cannot rewrite history. History is there for us to learn from. Obviously, in many instances, we have not learned the lesson of the past. But I do take this opportunity at this time, this month, to be proud of what African American blacks have contributed to the building of this country. We are making history now. So let us not forget the past, but let not the past rule the future for us and our children. This is our history, American history, so let's make it better than it's been.
Well, I just want to say thank you. We had an extensive program last year under the leadership of Council President Leventhal, and laid out a lot of the foundation. Let me just tell you that the folks that stand around me represent Black history. They truly have been contributors that have shaped, for me as a young man growing up in this county, And I know for all Montgomery County residents, and especially those that are black, understand the sacrifices that they've made. And so on behalf of all of my friends and my family, my generation, I thank each and every one of you for everything that you've done to allow for me to be successful. All right. Go ahead and take a picture.
All right, well, continuing on the theme of black history, I hope everyone, hello, Pat. I hope everyone will stick around now. We have a presentation on Montgomery County black history. All right, and we had just at the period of time when Cherie Branson was leaving the county council, she and I had a conversation in which she asked whether we might get Park and Planning to develop a map of African American history sites in the county. And I relayed that suggestion to Chairman Casey Anderson, and he took the suggestion to heart and detailed the staff of the Historic Preservation Division. I'm not sure if I'm stating correctly, so I'm going to ask Chairman Anderson to give appropriate credit to Park and Planning staff. And so what we have now, rather than a static piece of paper, rather than a document to be hung on a wall, Park and Planning has developed a website which is organic. It can be expanded, it can be added to, and I hope it will be over time. And so we've worked with some community leaders. I want to thank Warren Fleming and Anita Neal Powell and Tina Clark, among others, who reviewed this. And what we want to do is make it a living document. We're going to try to have a sort of ad hoc community group that will work with Park and Planning to identify additional sites. We're just starting with those sites that have officially achieved historic designation status, but there are other sites in the community that we will be reviewing and I hope including in the future as well. So this is really phase one of what will be an ongoing effort to acknowledge Montgomery County black history. Chairman Anderson, I want to thank you very much for your responsiveness to the suggestion that I conveyed to you, which originated with Cherie Branson. So there's been a lot of hands in this good work, and we look forward to seeing the presentation from Park and Planning. Chairman Anderson.
Thank you. And yes, you've recounted that conversation of about a year ago correctly. When I got that request from you, the idea from Ms. Branson that you'd conveyed, I thought it was a great idea, but as happens so many times, we wonder, well, how are we going to do this? We don't have any money to put it in the work program. We don't have $10,000 or $20,000 to produce a printed, glossy, full-color map that would do justice to the project. And so we thought, the staff thought of the idea of putting it online. And the great thing about that is not only do we not have to, come up with the money to print it and distribute it, but also that it's actually better than a paper map because we can improve it over time. And as you'd said, this is really just the down payment. What you're going to see today is the first iteration. It's not doesn't pretend to be the last word. It's really just what we hope is the first version of what will grow into an increasingly useful and interesting resource for anybody who's interested in African American history in Montgomery County. And you can see it wherever you have an internet connection, and then hopefully you can learn a little bit more about some of these sites, and then you'll be inspired to go visit some of them. So with that, I want to thank all the great people that we have here. Gwen Wright, obviously you know of her, longtime professional and personal interest in historic preservation, and Scott Whipple, of course, the head of historic preservation now, who has Gwen's old job. We have the award-winning, our specialist in mid-century modern history, who just wrote a book on that subject, Claire Kelly, but she's also obviously been intensively involved in all of our historic preservation projects, including this one. I also want to mention the Parks Department. Some of these sites are park sites, and Joey Lample, who you know has been involved in documenting and highlighting some of those. And also Chris McGovern, who I think is here, who does so much of the work of presenting visually the information of all the other people who work for particularly the planning department, but the agency, and really makes it useful and accessible and in some cases even sexy, and brings it to you in a form that's easily digestible, and also makes a product like this accessible to the public. So I want to thank all those folks. And with that, I will turn it over for the people who actually are in charge of the substance of this project.
Thanks. Gwen Wright, for the record, Planning Director, and I really appreciate both what Chair Anderson said, and I also appreciate the Council's interest in this topic. We have had, for many years since 1979, a very vigorous historic preservation program in Montgomery County, and from the earliest days, including in 1979 when the original master plan for historic preservation was approved, we have included and identified and highlighted sites that relate to African American history. The Josiah Henson property was actually one of the originally designated sites in 1979. But since 1979, we have done a lot of work to really better understand the history of our African American communities in Montgomery County. And it's a varied history, from the days of enslavement to the days of Jim Crow, to the days of desegregation, to some of, again, our more current history. And our staff in the Historic Preservation section has done a great job of looking at that, of bringing forward to you, the Council, sites that merit historic designation. The digital map that you're going to see today focuses on those sites that have already been designated on the master plan for historic preservation, but we see this as a first phase of a potentially bigger project where we can work with community groups to recognize other communities with African American history throughout the county that may not yet have any official historic designation. For example, this past Friday, we had a wonderful presentation as part of the Planning Department and Parks Department's Black History Month celebrations from representatives from the Littonsville community. And that community came forward to really talk about the history of the community, but also how they have sort of carried on as a close-knit community over time. So we are looking at, again, working with groups like that and others to recognize places in the county that are very, very special. In addition to all of the thanks that Chair Anderson gave, I also want to thank our communications staff, Bridget Schwiso and Chris Pfeiffer, who've done a lot of work on this project as well. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Scott Whipple and Claire Lise Kelly, and they can demonstrate the map.
Thank you. I just first want to say what a privilege it is to have the opportunity to present this today on the day that the Council has issued your proclamation in recognition of Black History Month. The thank yous have been made and the project has been largely described, so I'd just like to jump right in and show you what we've done. Each of these sites, as has been said, are listed in the county's master plan for historic preservation. What we've done for each of these is we've mapped these sites. The map is, or the sites you can get to either by clicking on the map or clicking the scroll bar at the bottom. But when you click on a site, it brings up an image of the site, and then it brings up a capsule summary about the site, and then in certain cases it gives you a link to a website where you can get more information. We have sites that are, all of these are listed in the master plan, or they are museum sites, or they're places in the parks. So let me scroll to a park site. So the Underground Railroad Experience Trail, for example, and then you can get information about that site by clicking the link and waiting. While we're waiting, there it is. And so this gives visitors an opportunity to navigate around around these sites. And could you let me get back to? Thank you. Yep, there we go. Yep, thank you. The other thing is that that this map is accessible on mobile devices, and so as people are navigating around the county, they can look at their cell phones and find the places that they want to go.
A quick question: what is the URL, and if it's the URL that I see up top here, is there a way that we can get a simpler URL? You know, Montgomery African American History or something that is easy to remember.
It's on our mcatlas.org, which is where you access a lot of our different GIS tools, and it's /BHM16, Black History Month 2016. But we can take a look at maybe creating something a little more friendly.
And is there a link to it at the Montgomery Planning main page?
I think after this presentation, we will add it as a press release on our main page with a link where folks can get to it. We were going to do that right after this presentation.
Great, and I'd like to ask of the County Council's communication staff if we could also put a link up on our own main page. And I want to thank Walton Harris of my office, who's been a liaison with Park and Planning and with our community leaders, again, Warren Fleming and Anita Neal Powell and Tina Clark, who reviewed this and provided very, very important feedback, and we look forward to any member of the community continuing to provide feedback on how this can be improved and expanded, and we will be setting up, I want to say, an informal mechanism, but there will be regular participants who will work on developing Phase 2, maybe in time for Black History Month next year. So thanks to everyone who pulled this together, and again, special thanks to Cherie Branson, who suggested this in the first place. Thank you all very, very much to the Planning Department. Very well done. So we now are going to our public hearing. It's been so long since I presided over the council, I sort of forgot how to do it. Thank you. I'm a newbie, but I'm doing my best here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is a public hearing on Subdivision Regulation Amendment 1601, Subdivision Regulations Rewrite. This SRA would delete Chapter 50, Subdivision of Land, and replace it. A Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee work session on this subdivision regulation amendment is tentatively scheduled for Monday, March 21st. For everyone scheduled to testify today, if you have not already done so, please bring copies of your written testimony to the clerk at this time. Anyone who wants to submit additional material for the council to consider should do so before the close of business Monday, March 14, so that your views can be included in the material which staff will prepare for the committee to consider. We have 5 witnesses signed up on agenda item number 6. They are Diane Schwartz-Jones, representing the county executive, Chairman Casey Anderson of the Montgomery County Planning Board, who will also speak to agenda items 7 and 8. Tim Dugan, stated as speaking on his own behalf, but I bet he's representing a client. Bill Commoners, similarly, probably representing a client, but listed here as testifying on his own behalf. And Danila Sheveko. Please, all witnesses come forward. Mr. Sheveko, I thought I saw you in the audience. Yeah, here you are. Mrs. Jones, please press the button at the base of your microphone and testify.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Leventhal. Good afternoon. My name is Diane Schwartz-Jones, and I am pleased to provide testimony on behalf of County Executive Isaiah Leggett on proposed subdivision regulation amendment 1601, which would repeal the current subdivision regulations and reenact a comprehensively rewritten subdivision ordinance. County Executive Leggett commends the Montgomery County Planning Board and its staff for their recognition of a need to continue to improve review and approval times and to simplify requirements as done first in the rewrite of the zoning ordinance and now in the proposed subdivision regulations. The executive branch is concerned about provisions of the draft subdivision regulations that could result in planning board decisions supplanting lead agency determinations in areas for which the lead agencies are legally and or programmatically responsible. The subdivision regulations need to recognize that there are areas that are committed to the regulatory authority of other departments. This will avoid putting projects in the untenable position of being unable to obtain subsequent approvals because of a decision that cannot be implemented as proposed because it is not consonant with laws or regulations administered by and committed to the expertise of other departments who have responsibility for important life safety, public safety, construction, or environmental determinations, or that have the ultimate ownership, liability, and responsibility for elements of a project. Rewriting the subdivision regulations is not a simple task and requires balancing of many interests, those of the community, the developers, the government, and future generations, businesses, and users. The current draft of the proposed regulations reflects much work and thought, but there are still issues to be resolved regarding extent of authority, balancing of the interests mentioned, imposition of new tasks with resulting added costs, and even legal authority in some instances. Montgomery County has an extensive history of top-notch development projects approved under the current subdivision processes, life and public safety and environmental requirements that have contributed significantly to our quality of life, community development, and the economic success and prosperity of the county. Collectively and collaboratively, we have made significant and visible improvements to the processing of development applications and permits through work on streamlining the review of applications, improving technology, managing our workflows, reducing regulatory overlap, and the rewrite of the zoning ordinance. As work on the rewrite of the subdivision regulations proceeds, we must assure that we retain the protections that reflect our successes both for today and for future county residents, communities, and businesses, and improve what will help us process applications efficiently so that we can continue to realize sustainable and quality projects. Executive staff is available and committed to working with the County Council and the Planning Board as work and deliberations on this important proposed regulation proceeds, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Chairman Anderson.
Thank you. Many of these provisions are important but rather technical. I want to focus especially on one issue, private roads, that we believe really bears further conversation with the council. The problem is that particularly in the more intensively developed areas of the county, we're finding that private roads are necessary in order to achieve the kind of environment for the neighborhood and the kind of standard of roadway that may not conform to the standard for a public road. We recognize that we have issues to resolve with DPS in particular, as well as DOT, in figuring out how to accommodate non-standard road designs and private roads under these circumstances. First, there's the issue of ensuring that private roads are designed and constructed properly. We certainly understand the need to make sure that private roads are built to appropriate structural standards. Ideally, if consensus can be reached about the use of private roads in certain circumstances, such roads should be governed by the site plan process and reviewed by DPS and DOT, who already have the professional engineering staff with the necessary expertise. And we hope to be able to reach consensus that that's the process that should be used. A second issue involved in the use of private roads is maintaining access to the public, especially when the roads are an integral part of a road network that's called for in the master plans. Therefore, in cases where the planning board has approved private roads, they've been required to be placed in a public access easement. However, there's been some difficulty in getting DPS to accept these easements on the record plat. Planning staff has been working with DPS and DOT to develop a standard easement document for this purpose, but we think that further work is needed on that issue. And the final issue I wanted to raise with private roads is how they're platted. The proposed revision anticipates that private roads will generally be created like a public road in a road parcel that's separate from the adjoining lot but not dedicated to the public. However, some recent plan approvals have demonstrated that these kind of parcels are a problem if there's underground parking structure underneath the vertical plane of the road parcel. Even though current subdivision provisions permit above ground or underground parking facilities to cross the lot line, DPS has pointed out that this actually violates building code standards that require firewalls within structures where such structures cross the lot line. To address this issue, developers in more intensively urbanized areas of the counties have proposed, and the planning board has approved, private roads created by a public access easement only and not within a separate and distinct parcel. This option for these limited circumstances has also been added to the proposed revision. These issues need further discussion, but the planning board believes that the option to create private roads in certain circumstances is absolutely necessary in order to achieve the land use as well as the transportation goals of the county, and we look forward to working through some of these issues with you and with the relevant executive branch agencies in the near future. Thank you.
Okay. At this point, Mr. Chairman, do you want to go ahead and speak to agenda items 7 and 8?
Sure. Agenda item 7, ZTA 1601. I think that you may hear testimony about this, and there's, I think, some understandable frustration on behalf of some of the neighbors who opposed the original development application in South Silver Spring that gave rise to this ZTA. I think for purposes of the discussion today, what's important to keep in mind is that the planning board made a decision about what it thought language in the overlay zone meant. We were interpreting the language that was adopted by the council as part of an overlay zone that was implemented with the Silver Spring master plan. A court subsequently came to a different conclusion about what the council meant. We chose not to appeal that decision because we don't appeal every decision that we lose, even if we don't agree with it, as we did not in this case. However, when this came to us as a ZTA, we viewed this as an opportunity for the body that wrote the overlay zone in the first place to make a definitive determination as to what they intended to try to accomplish with that language. It's really that simple. So I think that when you hear from some of the folks that are opposed to this about what is the basis for overturning a court's decision about what this language means, or why we should be looking at a specific, very narrow set of properties to be affected, I believe that that's not the appropriate way to frame this issue for your consideration. The question before you is, what was intended with this overlay zone language, and you, as the body that created that language, have an opportunity to set the record straight one way or the other and decide what was the original intent of the language in the overlay zone.
And agenda item number 8?
Yes. ZTA 1602 raises the question of retention of TDRs for outbuildings, in some cases, accessory dwelling structures that are built in conjunction with a farming operation where the additional structure was not covered by a retained TDR. And a planning board decision a few years ago changed the way that the board had handled this type of situation and found that in some cases we were going to require that an additional TDR be retained in order to build an additional structure that may have been contemplated by the property owner for some time. This ZTA allows property owners who had an existing structure, or there was clearly an expectation that another structure would be permissible, despite the fact that they had sold off their TDRs off the land, to go ahead and maintain that structure or to build that structure. So this is an effort to try to narrowly accommodate the reasonable expectations that properties have in the Ag Reserve, that certain accessory dwellings that are constructed in conjunction with a farming operation will not be rendered illegal by the fact that TDRs were sold off of the property. And in our judgment, this was a reasonable compromise to avoid opening the door to additional development on property where TDRs had been sold off, but to accommodate what was reasonably expected at the time the TDRs were sold off, and the kind of accessory structures that support the farming operation on an ongoing basis.
Thank you very much. Returning to agenda item number 6, Tim Dugan.
Yes, good afternoon, members of the County Council. My name is Tim Dugan of the law firm of Shulman Rogers. Preliminarily, on January 26th of this year, I submitted for the record detailed suggested amendments to the various sections of SRA 1601, which I hope you consider. The gist of my testimony today is that I'm not confident that two parts of the subdivision rewrite legislation, namely private roads and ownership lots, are ready for prime time. Private roads and ownership lots should be considered in conjunction with modifications to other related laws, some of which have been mentioned earlier, fire and safety and roads in particular. Today, planning board approved private roads and/or planning board approved ownership lots might not be implemented because such other county laws appear to be in conflict with the subdivision law, at least as to how they are being interpreted and applied. As Montgomery County endeavors to attract more investment and to evolve into urban centers and away from suburban sprawl, the county's legislation should be mindful of accommodating investment in the county, such as purchases and sales, financing and leasings, and private roads and ownership lots often facilitate such investment in the county. Also, accommodating infill development. By its nature, infill development occurs within existing developed areas. Fitting redevelopment within existing development requires much more flexibility than a greenfield development. And so I encourage the Council to establish flexibility and thus enable the agencies and developers to exercise common sense, and so that different circumstances don't have to be shoehorned into rigid one-size-fits-all regulations and risking having the investment and or the redevelopment not happen at all, or at very uncompetitive costs. And so I believe that flexibility and common sense can be accommodated without sacrificing safety, and I think flexibility and common sense can be accommodated without exposing the county to unlimited liability. So I look forward to working with everyone on this legislation, and I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. William Commoners.
Good afternoon, Mr. Leventhal, members of the council. My name is Bill Commoners with Lurch, Early & Brewer. I'm speaking as an individual today on this matter of broad public interest. First, I want to thank those on the planning board staff who drafted the subdivision regulation text. My partner Steve Robbins and I met with the staff on a number of occasions. They were very generous with their time and gave thoughtful consideration to our comments and our reasoning. We had a very productive dialogue and many issues were resolved, thereby allowing me to shorten any written testimony substantially. My comments today focus on issues that need additional time and effort. Most of this SRA is a positive refinement of current practices, but there are some challenging issues remaining, especially that relate to concentrated urban mixed-use development, and time is needed to resolve those elements in a way that protects the needs of the public and private sectors while facilitating development of the type the county's master plans are directing. So areas that require additional effort begin with ownership lots. These are a subset of subdivision. They create parcels for different ownerships within a single record lot and provide documentation of those boundaries in readily accessible public records. This is a critical concept for mixed-use development where different structures and uses want to be integrated into a single complex, but be owned and financed separately. The Council specifically endorsed ownership lots, adding them to the subdivision regulations in 2013. With several years' experience with the concept now, some clarification will likely be helpful. Roads. You've heard already that this is an issue of critical importance. There are many questions yet open about roads, particularly private roads. how they are delineated, and how they can accommodate structures below and above them, such as parking garages and balconies. This issue affects how the county can have good site design accommodate road needs without letting road requirements dictate site design. This should be accomplished and resolved as a part of this legislative effort. Economics. The subdivision regulations should build in the ability to consider economics as a factor in some decisions. The subdivision regulations are the nuts and bolts implementing the development process, and they have to deal with reality, and economics is a part of the reality for any development activity. There needs to be a simple and fair way to take into account changing economic conditions. Minor subdivisions. These were originally created as a simplified process for changing boundaries without increasing development, but new requirements keep getting added that serve to complicate the simplified process. Some refinement is needed to continue to fulfill the original purpose. Duration of approvals. Validity periods should have reasonable standards that are not punitive because some bad things happen to good projects that cause delay in moving forward to the next step. Record plats. Look carefully at section 50.8 about what has to be included on plats because they are only a snapshot in time. Requiring certain elements that are likely to change to be shown on plats, where changing them would require a new plat, just creates extra work for agency staffs and costs to property owners. Many of these restrictions, such as easements, can be instead documented through individual amendment documents in the land records with appropriate legal descriptions and graphic representations. Thank you very much.
Danila Sheveko, you're on the list. Please come forward. Mr. Commoners, please turn your microphone off. Mr. Sheveko, press the button at the base of your microphone. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the council. It's great to see everyone. I see the same faces as at the planning board testimony for this SRA. I wish there was more public involvement in this process like there was with the zoning code rewrite. After all, it is the first major rewrite of the subdivision regulations in like 50 years. So with that said, I just want to make several quick points. In terms of flexibility, I agree with Mr. Dugan that we do need flexibility for infill development, but it needs to really promote innovative and responsible development and not just the type of infill development that we experience down county all the time, where everything is stripped, all the natural resources and the trees destroyed. So with that said, one specific comment I have is as far as adjoining land. I hear of stories all the time where people want to save some environmental features like some trees that their neighbors have on adjoining land, but transferring that piece of land between adjoining neighbors ends up costing more than the land itself. And so for these kind of situations that do come up on a regular basis, I believe we do need to have a simplified and streamlined process. Whereabouts the current exception is for only 1% of total area or 2,000 square feet, and I can show you on maps plenty of examples where it's perfectly reasonable to transfer adjoining property without going through the entire subdivision process, because there's plenty of outlots out there. Nothing is going to be built on them. It's an outlot now. It's an outlot in the future, and people shouldn't have to go through the whole rigmarole just to do a simple land transfer like that. Similarly, as far as the administrative approval process that has been introduced into this SRA, I can see the reasoning for it, but at the same time, I feel like I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but I feel like it kind of disadvantages smaller developers to bigger developers. So instead of having clear guidelines and exceptions, developers are channeled into this administrative approval process, which, in a worse circumstance could be a pay-to-play kind of situation. So just wanted to make sure there's an even playing field for smaller developers versus larger ones. And I will submit written testimony later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony. There are no questions. We appreciate all the witnesses in this panel. Agenda item 7 is a public hearing on zoning text amendment 1601, Ripley Silver Spring South Overlay Zone Standards. This zoning text amendment would amend the development standards for the Ripley Silver Spring South Overlay Zone. The Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee is tentatively scheduled to hold a work session on this zoning text amendment on Monday, March 21st. Anyone who wants to submit additional material for the council to consider should do so before the close of business Monday, March 14, so that your views can be included in the material which staff will prepare for the committee to consider. We have 3 witnesses signed up for this hearing: Maynard Mack, testifying on his own behalf, David Brown, testifying on behalf of 8045 Condominium, and Jody Klein, testifying on behalf of Silver Spring Extra Space, LLC. Mr. Mack.
Thank you. Maynard Mack, Secretary of the Board at Condo 8045 Newell Street. 3 minutes, so fasten your seatbelts. ZTA 1601 would illegally spot change the zoning for a single property. Here are 10 undeniable facts for the council and its legal staff to consider. Fact 1, the purpose of the Ripley South Silver Spring overlay was to step up gradually from the surrounding 2 to 4 story buildings. Tenting is, one of the plan authors tells me, is the technical term, to avoid creating a cliff effect at the edge of the newly emerging development. And as Glenn Krieger, the team leader for the overlay, put it at a planning board hearing, quote, we made a conscious effort to protect the edges. We felt we needed to treat Newell Street as an edge because there were garden apartments across the street. And when 8045 Newell Street, my building, project came in, we applied it in the way I just described. Fact 2, indeed they did. 8045 Newell Street was required to honor the zoned 60-foot setback. Concrete evidence that the overlay zoning regulations were taken seriously until the second planning board vote in 2013. Fact 3, in its first vote, a public straw vote on Comstock's request for a zoning exemption, the planning board voted 3-2 against granting the exemption. Fact 4, Comstock immediately requested a delay. 5 months later, with no significant changes to the proposal, the board changed its vote, granting an exemption. Fact 5, on January 20th, 2014, Judge Cheryl McCalley of the Circuit Court ruled against Comstock and ordered the planning board to withdraw the exemption. Fact 6, the planning board could have appealed this ruling, but it did not. 2 weeks ago, on February 11th, and again today, the board chair publicly made the surprising assertion that he disagreed with the court ruling and therefore was justified in ignoring it. Fact 7, Mr. Berliner calls 1601 a clarification, but it would be an illegal spot zoning change that would affect a single property and a single property owner far from his district while ignoring similar zoning ambiguities in his own district. Had clarification ever been needed, which we deny, surely the unchallenged circuit court ruling provides it to this day. Fact 8, no exemptions are needed for development on this property. Current zoning allows building to 45 feet on the lot. Fact 9, the current owner bought the property in 2002 after the overlay limitations had been in place for 2 years. He knew. Fact 10, Mr. Berliner's ETA 1601 is special interest legislation benefiting a single individual. This is illegal. 10 facts leading to the opinion that 1601 reeks of you get as much justice as you can afford and don't like the circuit court decision, no problem, we'll change the law for you. We deserve better, and this council can provide better justice and fair process, not a change to help one individual at the expense of the many owners of the 120 condos who bought knowing that the zoning in effect prohibited building over 45 feet. Thank you.
Mr. Brown.
Members of council, David Brown on behalf of the 8045 Newell Street condominium. Mr. Mack has outlined many of the concerns of my client. I won't repeat them. I want to address primarily the claim that there is some confusion about what the council intended, and therefore this bill will serve to clarify. There is no confusion. There is no need for clarification. The issue of the council's intent was thoroughly vetted and argued in the lawsuit in which the condominium association prevailed. The main reason why Judge McCallie ruled the way she did is because it makes absolutely no sense to mention Newell Street at all in the overlay zone if the only intention is to protect the edge along Eastern Avenue. It's completely superfluous language in the bill, and she said that the only plausible way in which to interpret that language in the overlay zone was to have the height restriction apply all along Newell Street as well as Eastern Avenue, which happens to be also exactly what the team leader for the South Silver for the entire Silver Spring CBD in 2000 testified was the intent. There are low-rise garden apartments across the street from this 8001 Newell Street, and the intention was to protect them with a comparably sized height across the street. Those apartments are 40 feet high, and the height limitation across the street for any new development would be 45 feet. And that, of course, is the height limitation that all of the properties, the other two properties along Newell Street, honored when they redeveloped after the master plan was put in. What you got from the planning board in a memorandum dated February 19th on this subject was simply a rehash of the argument that was made in the circuit court and that was rejected in circuit court to explain why the words Newell Street appear in the overlay zone. In the words of the planning board recommendation, the planning board interpreted the restriction to apply along Eastern Avenue and that portion of Newell Street where it intersects with Eastern and confronts the residential zone in the District of Columbia. Well, attached to my testimony is the ruling of Judge McCallie, where she makes clear that there's no place where Newell Street confronts a residential zone in the property or any property along Newell Street is confronting a residential zone in the District of Columbia. The rest of my testimony includes the other exhibits that make very clear that the council's intent was exactly as stated as it was in the overlay zone to apply along Newell Street as well. And any confusion about that is explained. I've thoroughly explained that in the details in my testimony and the exhibits. Thank you.
Mr. Klein.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Jody Klein. I'm an attorney at the law firm Miller, Miller & Canby with offices here in Rockville at 200B Monroe Street. I'm worried that my testimony might create confusion about the confusion that's already in the text memo. So let me just kind of depart from what's in my letter and just kind of hit a couple of high points. When the planning board draft was published and sent to the council, the text dealing with the goals of the plan specifically says we're going to control the height along Eastern Avenue. It's the only reference made. That's the only street that's referenced. Later on in the design guidelines, there is a reference to Newell Street, which had been logically interpreted to be just that edge of the properties that were at the corner of Newell and Eastern Avenue. So when you look at the plan, it specifically only references one street. But when you look at the material that's attached to my letter, you'll see how the evolution and the rewriting of the various versions of the text did cause some confusion, and that's what we're trying to straighten out. Mr. Mack and I kind of have the same point to make, but I'm coming at it from a different point of view. I don't believe there are any legal infirmities what you're being asked to do. Legislative action is why you're here. I'm regularly, when I appear before the planning board and in circuit court, told by those bodies, Mr. Klein, if you don't like the way we're interpreting the law, then go to the legislature and get it changed. And that's what we're here to do, to clarify, or I'd go so far as to say reaffirm what I believe was your clear intent if you look at page 60 of the adopted master plan. I'm going to suggest your job can be easier than listen to all of us debate this stuff. And I'm going to say rely on previous council wisdom. I sat in this auditorium probably a year or 2 years ago when you were listening to all the wash in scientific evidence on the Clarksburg master plan. Just a lot of really difficult technical stuff that was confusing, I'm sure. And Mr. Leventhal, probably in a little bit of exasperation one day, threw his hands up and said, who am I going to listen to here? I've got people on one side, I've got people on the other side. You've got very good experts. You've got these dueling issues. I'm going to rely on the people that are advising me because I think that's where I'm going to get the most objective analytical opinion. Attached to my letter is a memorandum of March, I think it is, of 2013, requested by Councilmember Irvin in response to the issue at the planning board about what is the proper interpretation of the master plan. And I'll just do this very quickly. Her conclusion is the staff does not believe that it was the council's intent that the sector plan require the 45-foot height limit and related setback requirement along the full length of Newell, but only on the corner where it confronts a residential zone in the District of Columbia. My point being, your staff already looked into this at the time of the debate at the planning board and analytically, comprehensively, and cogently concluded that the plan, the way the board interpreted it, was the right way to interpret it based on her experience. Thank you.
Okay. There are no questions for this panel. Thank you to all of our witnesses. Agenda item 8 is a public hearing on zoning text amendment 1602, agricultural zone, transfer of development rights requirements. This ZTA would exempt certain dwellings in the agricultural zone from the calculation of density under certain circumstances and generally amend the provisions concerning the special requirements for the transfer of density. The Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee is tentatively scheduled to hold a work session on this zoning text amendment on Monday, March 21st. Persons who wish to submit additional material for the council to consider should do so before the close of business Monday, March 14, so that your views can be included in the material which staff will prepare for the committee to consider. We have 6 witnesses signed up for this hearing: Jeremy Criss, representing the county executive, Robert Jameson, Jim Clifford, Susan Jameson, Michael Jameson, and Charles Jameson. Mr. Criss, please press the, Mr. Jameson, if you'll turn your microphone off, please. And Mr. Criss, if you'll press the button at the base of your microphone and testify, please.
Good afternoon, members of the County Council. I'm Jeremy Criss. I'm the Agricultural Services Manager, and I'm here to provide comments on behalf of the County Executive, Isaiah Leggett, regarding Zoning Text Amendment 16-02, Agricultural Zones, Transfer of Development Right Requirements. The County Executive understands the intent of the ZTA exempts existing farm tenant dwellings or detached accessory apartments in the Agricultural Reserve AR zone from the calculation of transferable development rights. The County Executive understands the importance of exempting existing farm tenant dwellings. However, the County Executive cannot support ZTA 1602 unless it is amended to also include future farm tenant dwellings and detached accessory apartments, which remain accessory to farming, and exempts them from the calculation of transferable development rights. The County Executive is one of the strongest supporters of the Agricultural Reserve, including the legislative intent to promote agriculture as the primary land use. It is his belief, however, that ZTA 1602 needs work to meet the needs of agricultural community and fulfill the intent of the AR zone. It is important that all stakeholders of the Agricultural Reserve recognize that if a property is subdivided, this does not mean the farming activities will discontinue. There are numerous examples of proposed subdivisions in the Agricultural Reserve, including Barnesville Oaks, where both development and farming activities will continue to coexist. The Barnesville Oaks property encompassed 840 acres, and the subdivision proposed 21 new lots, 3 outlots, and 2 farm remainder parcels totaling 780 acres, which includes 9 existing dwellings. As proposed, the 2 farm remainder parcels of 780 acres, or over 90% of the total farm acres, would be restricted to agricultural use and not subject to further subdivision. And for the record, Barnesville Oaks subdivision is the property that Chairman Anderson referenced in his testimony a few years ago that resulted in the change in the policy. The executive staff will be available to further discuss these comments and suggested amendments as part of the work session. Thank you.
Mr. Jameson. Well, Bobby Jameson. Bobby's not here. Okay. Mr. Clifford.
Good afternoon, council members.
I'm here as an individual. That's you?
Maybe,
Okay.
Jim, maybe just sit back
All
just
right.
a little bit.
I
Yeah.
will. I'll be happy to. I have written testimony, but I think I'm going to go off script here and do this a little bit differently. About 4 months ago, I discovered this particular provision that was a radical change for the agricultural community. The provision was in the new zoning code, the 2014 rewrite. It was a single sentence, and that single sentence created a major problem. It said, if a property is subdivided, dwellings associated with those uses are not excluded from the calculation of density, and dwelling was also defined as a farm tenant dwelling. That was a major problem because I knew a lot of people who had done ag easement in the ag easement programs, the 4 different ones that are referenced in the ZTA, who had gotten rid of all their TDRs, no longer had those. They were stripped intentionally by the program. And so what this was going to cause was a recalculation that was going to be very disappointing for the farmer because they would reserve a TDR for a tenant house, or excuse me, for a market rate lot, or they would reserve a TDR for a child lot, but they would never reserve a lot or a TDR for a tenant house. So with this interpretation, this new law from 2014, all of a sudden, all those people from in the earlier ag easement program documents had gotten rid of TDRs that they needed to do the very thing they had reserved to do, which is a child lot or a market rate lot. When they went to go get that TDR to do that subdivision, the mere act of subdividing made them go back and put TDRs on their tenant houses, 1 or 2 or whatever. I've always believed, the agricultural community has always believed, that it was necessary to have tenant houses. It's the lifeblood, especially orchards and produce. If you want to have more farm-to-table type of industry here in Montgomery County, the tenant house is the lifeblood of that. It's critical. If we have to go back and recalculate our TDRs and take them away from the tenant houses, and if I want to build a lot and I don't have enough TDRs, I got to tear my tenant house down. That's counterproductive. So actually, I sat down with Jeff Zions, and we came up with a ZTA that I thought was going to take care of the low-lying fruit, which was basically child lots and the ag easement program lots that were accounted for in their ag easements. Unfortunately, it turns out that I was trying to go for the low-lying fruit, and the agricultural community really wanted to take the whole tree down. So that's where we are right now. We're looking at a situation where we need a simple fix that will fix everything. This is a problem that can be easily resolved by removal of one sentence and replacement of that sentence. I'm out of time, but I'll be happy to talk to Jeff about that, and maybe before it gets to the Fed committee, make that fix. But for right now, the ZTA as it stands, although it does everything we need it to do temporarily, is not good enough to fix the overall problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan Jameson.
Good afternoon.
Okay, Jim, you need to turn your light off, and Mrs. Jameson, now you're all right. Yeah.
Good afternoon. In reference, we basically agree with Jeremy Chris, and Jim Clifford has indicated that the ZTA is not good enough for the whole farming community, and he's right. My husband brokered the sale of thousands of TDRs over the many years, and I have 2 TDR easements I brought you, just sample ones. They're basically all the same. They basically state you do not need a TDR for a dwelling house. People, whether they were in ag easement TDRs or just the normal TDR program, were told that by the county attorney's office. It was in the law. Everyone relied on it. The settlement attorneys were clear on it. There was no confusion. And yet, when the law passed in 2014, and when the planning board changed their reinterpretation of the law in 2010, that was completely changed on these people. Now, I mean, I question the legality of that. I don't think that's legal to take an easement and then just incredibly broaden it with one legislative act. Easements are supposed to be construed narrowly according to what the people agree to. So I think it really is unfair to the TDR people who sold TDRs, but it's also unfair to the farming community in general. I mean, I know that you support farming, but farm tenant houses are so important to keeping farming viable. What's going to be the first thing to go when someone develops their farm? If they have to choose between a house, one of the cluster subdivision house, and a farm tenant house, the farm tenant house is going to get raised. And that person living there who loves the country, who loves living in the country, and who works there on the farm is going to be moved out to Germantown or Gaithersburg and have to commute in. And, you know, that's really, it's not just unfair to the farmer, but it's so unfair to the farm employees who are really being hurt by this. They're the first ones that are going to go. They're most dramatically felt by this. And also, there is a lot of theft on farm, and it's rising all the time, excuse me. We need farm tenant houses to keep our farms safe. Those people watch the farms when no one else is there. And I mean, we submitted a letter, we had many reasons, and I'll try to go through some of them before I lose time. All right, some of the other reasons. A pro-farm government policy should necessarily be reflected in a pro-tenant house policy. Farmers need to provide decent and local housing for their help. Under the old law and the traditional interpretation of the law, a farmer could put a double-wide trailer or a modest house at the center of his farm operation and give a decent place to live to his farm help. This supports the economic viability of farming. Due to world economic factors, farm margins are now thinner than in many years, and this is not forecast to change. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you. Michael Jameson. Yeah, please turn your light off. Yep, okay. Michael Jameson.
Good afternoon. I am Michael Jameson. I'm chairman of the Agricultural Preservation Advisory Board, and I'm also a county grain and turf farmer. I'm here to testify on behalf of the Agricultural Preservation Advisory Board in opposition to ZTA 1602. The Ag Preservation Advisory Board has also submitted written detailed testimony that will help council members understand our reasons for opposition. The Ag Preservation Advisory Board is not opposed to the principles of 1602. However, we believe the ZTA does not provide enough relief necessary for all stakeholders in the agricultural reserve zone. Yes, the ZTA would provide relief to certain landowners under certain circumstances from retaining TDRs for farm tenant dwellings or child lots when that property goes through subdivision. However, it would leave a great number of the AR zone landowners without any relief under the code. No matter how well-intended ZTA 1602 may be, the Ag Preservation Board believes that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. The ZTA attempts to address very complex land use issues without providing relief to all affected. The zoning code that was adopted on October 14, 2014 fundamentally changed the previous interpretation of the code, mainly detailing when a TDR needed to be retained for farm tenant dwellings when that property is subdivided. Up until 2014, the previous code had been in place since the inception of the AR zone in 1982. While the ZTA represents an avenue to address a critical need, it simply does not address the needs of all stakeholders. Because this is such a complex issue, the Ag Preservation Board feels that the best approach would be to assign this issue to a policy working group that is appointed by the County Council to thoroughly vet this important and complex land use issue. This policy working group should include a cross-section of landowners and organizations considered to be stakeholders and to work collectively by providing recommendations to the County Council on solutions that are workable for all. The Ag Preservation Board believes this approach could be similar to that of the Ad Hoc Advisory Policy Committee that was appointed by then Council President Leventhal, the rest of the council, in April of 2006. This working group successfully tackled and made excellent recommendations to the County Council to address very complex issues. At a minimum, the Ag Preservation Board recommends that the policy working group tackle the following: the zoning code interpretation on when a TDR needs to be retained for a farm, tenant dwelling, or child lot upon subdivision. Also, confirmation as a matter of public policy that TDR easements are a type of agricultural land preservation easement. And in addition, examine transitory uses on TDR easements. Do appreciate your time, and we look forward to working.
Thank you. Charles Jameson.
Hi, I'm Charles Jamie Jameson. First I want to say thank you, but one of the things we and most of the ag community are most upset that there wasn't adequate notice given to landowners about this ZTA. We cannot support this ZTA as it is currently written. However, we are in favor of amending sections of this new ordinance. In reference, we are delighted that the action is being taken to restore the 28-year-old law. However, this amendment only fixes a small part of a big problem. In addition, this ZTA is discriminatory in nature by protecting only a select few. Specifically, we are against the amendments in the ZTA where it states a tenant dwelling must be exempt from the density of the calculation if the dwelling existed before October 31, 2014. And this is really the hang-up. If the property was encumbered by an agricultural easement program administered by the county before October 31, 2015, the AEP program, the MOUTH program, the Rural Legacy program, and the BLT programs. To put it simply, we're against the idea of a tenant dwelling having to retain TDR for years past and in perpetuity. This is on the tract that the main farm dwelling is still there. It should be allowed. Since the inception of the Ag Reserve Zone in 82 until 2015, agricultural easement programs and TDR easement have been negotiated with county officials on the pretense that TDRs did not need to be retained for tenant dwellings. Regardless of subdivision, decisions were made by landowners, us included, based on the understanding of law from 82 to present. After the specific case of Barnesville Oak, unique in itself, the inception of that 28-year-old law changed. This has resulted in a solidified county agreements that run inconsistent with current law. Let it be made aware county officials who administered these easements didn't even know the interpretation had changed. To put it simply, legal enforceable agreements were made by landowners that were written and approved by the county attorney's office since 1982. Now Park and Plan has decided to take those rights away, giving special preference to one group who has sold their bundle of rights over another who has not sold their bundle of rights is unfair and discriminatory. There are many farms that have entered into the TDR program. These landowners were told that they would not need this. These TDR easement contracts administered by the county specifically state the minimum number of houses that may be constructed. Under current law, TDR easement agreements are inconsistent with current law. There are many easements that the county falls into this. Real quick, in summary, JAT wants to thank the council for this opportunity. We realize this ZTA fixes part of the problem, but not all. We would be grateful if the council could form a committee to be chaired by Jeremy Chris's office to correct the inequities that currently exist. I know Jeremy wants that job and he'll thank me for it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you to all our witnesses. We appreciate hearing your points of view, and that concludes today's session of the Montgomery County Council.